huge stride since spring ball in terms of, he did a great job in the weight room this summer with Wilson and working on his flexibility and doing some different stuff there so he can throw from different arm angles and some of those things. I think he's really improved in the RPO game, making those reads and just getting more comfortable, First time doing anything in spring ball is really his first time repping some of our main pass concepts. It takes a little bit of time to get those down. So I think you just see he's got a second time around getting to that. He's much more comfortable. He knows what he's doing, and he's just made really good improvement.
Looking back, what was your main evaluation of Chris last year in the 11 games he started?
Chris did some good things and he did some bad things, and I think a lot of that just comes with mental focus, throughout a game. And, I thought he performed a lot better at home than on the road. And so, I think the biggest thing for him moving into this year is just keeping that focus every single day. Chris had a lot of really good days in the meetings and on the practice field, and he had some bad days. And, I think that correlates when you're inconsistent. You get some inconsistent play, which he had last year, but he did do a lot of really good things. And I think that he's come out in this camp and been so much more consistent every single day and having focus and being ready to go. I think that's the biggest thing.
How difficult is it to judge what those guys are doing, considering you're kind of constantly funneling different wide receivers in and trying to get timing and all that stuff? Is that effective at all?
For sure, it definitely does. Right now we're really trying to nail down who our receivers are, and there's a lot of new guys that we brought in, so there's a lot of rotation right now. And those guys, heck, they might not even know who's in so much because you guys see our practice, with the 2 spot going on. There's a lot of moving parts, especially when we got 3 quarterbacks repping with the 1s and 2s. And, Chris is with the 3s, then he's with the 1s, he's with the 2s. They're moving all over the place. So there's definitely some learning curve, with the receivers and with the tight ends. I think that's probably where they're best right now is throwing to those 2 tight ends with John and Harry. Because they got the most work with them this summer, but now we got some of these new receivers in, and it's a little more difficult to know who's in. So I think there's definitely a little bit of that. But hopefully this next week we can really nail down who the guys are going to be and start moving forward with those guys so we can get really good timing before we go to Ohio State.
Earlier in camp, Lane Kiffin praised Kevin Smith for his development with the running backs and said that he's done a great job. Have you seen anything out of those freshman running backs, not even just BJ and James, but maybe some of those younger guys like Larry and Calvin?
Yeah, Coach Smith, he's the best I've ever seen at coaching the running back position. He does such a phenomenal job with those guys and getting them right, and he's so detail-oriented with his teaching, and I think that's where you see a lot of the success that we've had at the running back position here. It's Coach Smith and the details that he has with those guys and making them improve. So like you said, James and BJ have certainly done a lot of good things, but Larry and Kelvin Dean have been extremely impressive so far in the camp, and you can tell those guys are very naturally talented runners, and they're still learning, and they're still learning from Coach Smith's coaching style. And so as they keep learning the details of the offense and everything that they have to do, I think you'll see those guys making a lot of plays.
You mentioned splitting time with the wide receivers, but one of the wide receivers that seems to have gotten at least some type of consistent spot is John Mitchell.
For sure.
And he had a really good spring, and then transitioning into the fall, looks like he's having a good fall.
Absolutely.
Do you see him playing a really significant role, knowing that you lose some wide receivers?
Absolutely. When you lose Javon from last year, obviously there was a huge need for us to have a receiver step up, and I think John Mitchell has kind of he's kind of owned that role, and he knows that he needs to be that guy. From a talent standpoint, he's big, he's tall, he's fast. He can do a lot of good things, and he's still got to work on his consistency day to day and keep getting better and better. But you definitely can see the quarterbacks have some trust in him and like to throw him the ball, and he does give you a vertical threat down the field, which is critical in this offense. We don't like to have short drives. We like to, run, play action, and hit a shot. And so I think he's one of those guys that can come alive doing some of those things. And so he certainly had a really good spring. He's made some plays in fall. He's got to keep improving. And, I think he's someone we're going to have to count on this season to make a lot of plays.
With the freshman running backs, mainly Larry, how have they transitioned to this program and transitioned to college football?
Yeah, I think this offseason program that we have with Coach Love, it's so different than what you get at the high school level, and Coach Love does such a great job of getting those freshmen developed extremely fast. Now Larry is, as you guys probably see, physically very developed, for a freshman, and so Coach Love, I think, did a great job of getting him in, and Coach Love does a great job of, not just making every single thing for everybody. He really owns in on each individual and what they need, and I think he's really developed those guys and gotten them physically stronger and putting them in a position to play. So once they got in here, thankfully we do get some meeting time in the summer, so they got a little bit of a head start on the offense, but you still can see physically they got all the tools that you want. It's just mentally you got to keep getting those reps and getting them ready to go.
How do you kind of judge the offense day by day, knowing that, as you mentioned, you'll have Chris run with the threes one day, and then 2 snaps later he'll be running with the ones, and then a couple snaps later he'll be running with the twos. How do you kind of judge the offense and get a gauge on how the offense is going to look come fall, knowing that you don't really have a consistent depth chart yet?
Yeah, I think we're still in that process of figuring things out, but obviously we expect success with no matter what quarterback is in, because all those guys I think have the ability to lead us and to do some really good things. So no matter what quarterback is in there, or what receiver, or what tight end, we demand success and demand the best, with who we are in this offense. And so when we don't score on a drive or whatever, it's disappointing. Or if we don't convert a third down, it's disappointing, or turn the ball over. Those things are all disappointing. So we expect success no matter what quarterback's in. But certainly, throughout this week and a little bit into the next week, we want to really nail down who our core guys are and really start going to work with them.
What have you seen from the tight ends so far in camp?
I mean, Harry and John, I think you guys all know that those guys are phenomenal players and phenomenal people, and they've had a great start to camp, making a lot of plays and doing a lot of good things. We're going to have to really count on both of those guys. But I've been really impressed with some of those other tight ends that we have. Logan Peterson's a guy that hasn't played very much here, but he's done a really good job of getting better, and he put a lot of weight on for fall camp, and he's improved significantly. Ramad Smith is another freshman I think that you'll be hearing down the line, being an extremely talented tight end, and he's got some really good ball skills, so he's another guy I think that's working his way, and he keeps improving, somebody that we can utilize as a weapon. So that position to me is, that and running back is the most talented for sure on our offense, and so we're going to have to count on those guys.
With the quarterbacks, obviously last year, first year as an offensive coordinator, first year really as a position coach.
Absolutely.
What did you learn from last year's quarterback battle that maybe you have brought into this year in terms of how you evaluate them?
Yeah, in terms of the evaluation, I think things remain the same. I think it's just really the demand that I'm asking of these guys is a lot higher this year. And, I don't know if it's the third year overall for the players in this system or my second year as a coordinator, whatever it may be, but I think the quarterbacks have a lot more on their shoulders this year in terms of, like what I talked about with Chris, with protections and even changing run plays and doing some of those things. So the mental standpoint and, the mental focus and consistency day in, day out, it's been really important to me with this battle.
Is it responsibilities or is it freedom?
A little bit more freedom for them, and also both responsibility too, because Chris has been here another year. Nick had that spring, and Justin is a really smart guy too. So those three kids in there are really, really smart players, and so the more they show that they can do, the more we'll allow them. There was a play in the scrimmage that Chris saw man-to-man coverage. He saw Willie had press by Armani and thought that was a good matchup, and he checked to throw a go ball to him, and he just underthrew the ball a little bit. Willie could have made the play, so that was one thing that was really encouraging to see him. He did that on his own. It wasn't us that had to do it, where I feel like last year we had to do that a little bit more for them. This year I think with this group of quarterbacks, they're a little bit more advanced in the system and knowing what to do, and we're given some of the freedom to be able to check and do some of those things.
Does that allow them to play faster? The offense?
Oh, definitely. Definitely, because instead of having to scream over from the sideline and say, hey, get out of this play, whatever it may be, we have confidence in those guys to be able to check out of pressure looks or whatever it may be. Now you can go so much faster because you don't need the quarterback looking over to the sideline every play. So I think it's definitely something that if they can continue to improve on, could be a good weapon for us.
With you're trying to run through a whole bunch of guys at wide receiver. You're trying to do it also at running back.
Definitely.
The offensive line, I think they'll tell you they're still working.
Yeah, definitely.
And you got quarterbacks.
Yes.
So what unit do you have to prioritize and say, we got to get this one right first, or none of the other stuff will work?
Right. I think receiver to me is the biggest position to really nail down. We got, like I said, a lot of new guys in there compared to, maybe the offensive line, we know who those guys are a little bit more, and they're still gelling for sure. But receivers, there's some new people out there, D'Lo from South Florida and Rashawn Lewis from UCF. So some of those guys, we're trying to figure them out, give them opportunities, and that's the biggest position to me we need to nail down to find out who we're going to go with, because that's the biggest thing too with the quarterbacks and getting the rhythm and timing with those guys down. I think, the offensive line, we kind of, know where they are, but there's still, battles going on and people improving there and gelling and all that. The running back room is extremely talented, so I think we'll feel good about that position. The tight ends, you guys know who those guys are, and, the quarterbacks are some talented guys as well. So,
You pleased with the offensive line so far?
I think I'd like it to be better. I'd like us to have some more efficiency in the run game thus far in camp. I think one thing you got to give credit to is Coach Spencer's defense is incredibly difficult to go against. There's a reason Coach Kiffin brought him in here, and he's done some really good things in the past. And at Charlotte, they did a tremendous job at stopping the run, and heck, we saw it firsthand. But we'd still like to see a little bit more up front from those guys, and I think they take a lot of pride in that. And they'll keep working towards it, and we'll get that run game to where we want it to be.
Overall, just second year as a coordinator, how are you different this year, whether it's upstairs or out there, than maybe last year? What was your biggest takeaway?
Yeah, I think, the biggest thing is, just trusting yourself and not second guessing yourself, as a first time coordinator, it's the first time you're doing everything. And so, if something doesn't work, maybe you second guess yourself, but probably just more confidence in knowing what we're doing and, still, getting to know what coach wants. And I think we have a really good relationship now of knowing, hey, here's what he wants to do here and so on and so forth. And just knowing, all right, here's, what we're going with, here's the plays we want to run versus this, here's the checks we want to get to, so on and so forth. I think we're just more comfortable with that.
Calvin Ashley has a practice this year. I know that's more of a thing with Coach Kiffin, but on the offensive wise, are you guys proceeding with the idea that it's going to be Marquise against Ohio State, or is that still up in the air?
That's still a battle. There's still, a whole week here, really 2 weeks before we really get into game prep against Ohio State. So, Marquise has done some good things, but, there's certainly a battle there. Doug Johnson, he's done some good things as well at the tackle position. He's somebody that can really push Marquise, and, if Calvin comes back, there's another piece to it too. So, it's not locked down for sure. There's no, we like to say there's no depth chart. There's still open positions to be taken right now.
Anyone else?